How the U.S. imperialized Cuba. The U.S. took over Cuba after the Spanish-American War in 1898, when Cuba was fighting against the Spanish to gain their independence, and the U.S. used that to their advantage and pulled their navy into Havana Harbor and took over and backed Cuba, and the Spanish pretty much got out, known as a splendid little war. So it was so short and easy, it wasn't really a big deal for the U.S. They just pulled right up and kicked them out. And but in 1901, the Platt Amendment was installed, which restricted Cubans' rights to run their own country and what they can do and what they can't do. This political cartoon to the left here also shows how easy it was for the U.S. It just shows Uncle Sam walking right through the water, right to Cuba, pulling the Navy behind. Just kind of takes over Cuba and kicks Spain out without even really a problem at all. Short-term impacts of imperializing Cuba from the U.S.'s perspective. So pretty much some short-term impacts are creates a great reputation for the U.S. It shows that they're the new power in the Northern Hemisphere and that nobody should mess with them, and that their intentions are to be like pretty much everyone else and to try to push the U.S. to be a bigger and better country. Some negative impacts are creates resentment through the world of people who are against imperialism. The U.S. has also ends up being responsible for anything the Cubans do and their actions. And yeah, it also creates resentment towards the U.S. from the Cuban people because the Cuban people didn't really want anybody in control of them. So that's also a negative impact. Short-term impacts of imperializing Cuba from the Cubans' perspective. Some positives are Cuba gained freedom. Cuba gained its freedom from Spain. Gained independence in the end because after the Platt Amendment was installed, then eventually they kicked Spain out and then they kicked U.S. out later after getting angry with them. Another positive is that the U.S. protected them for that short amount of time that they were under the U.S. control. Some negative impacts are that they were controlled by the U.S. A lot of the Cubans were against that. The Platt Amendment, which restricted their ability to run their economy and their government how they wanted to. The U.S. milked pretty much all the resources dry, which really they kind of like left them for dry and didn't really leave many other options to do anything. The U.S. also controlled all of Cuba's trade industry and everything coming in and out of there, which is also another negative for the Cubans. Long-term impacts from imperializing Cuba from the U.S.'s perspective. Some positives are it secured Cuba for naval and trade ports like Guantanamo Bay, which are key even to this day. They still use them quite a bit. New products are available in the U.S. market for less than they usually would because they don't have to import them from as far away. Some negative impacts are the U.S. was looked at as the same as a lot of European nations, which they didn't really want to be looked at as. Also built resentment towards the U.S. for other countries and Cubans. Still tension even till very recently between the two. There was still trade embargoes and there wasn't really allowed to go there, and no one was allowed to travel there. Long-term impacts from imperializing Cuba from the Cuban perspective. Some positives are they get control of Cuba back after the whole thing is done. They finally get their country back and they're free. They control the resources, so it's the first time in a while that nobody's really like milked them dry of all the resources. They control their mines and all the other natural resources. It gets Spain out of their country because Spain's been in their country for a very long time. Some negative ones though, once the U.S. leaves, the economy goes down quite a bit. Several trade embargoes are inputted on them, which also makes their economy go down even more. And they're vulnerable because they're such a small country and not very strong compared to the U.S. and other superpowers in the world.